Hello everyone and welcome to Diamonds of Craft, where I make things. My name is Sarah and I am indeed back with another collab video. A while ago, a few of us doll artists decided that we wanted to do a Baldur's Gate 3 collab, and as I've already made Karlach and Orin from Baldur's Gate 3, I was fully invested in this one. On my list of characters to make from Baldur's Gate 3 was indeed the Emperor. I thought sculpting him would be a good challenge for me, so I opted to go with him. So in this collab we have me, Lemon Kitten Creations, and Unbridled Artistry. Go and check out Unbridled Artistry's video after this one if you haven't already, and Lemon Kitten Creations pictures on Instagram. I will link their socials below, so check them out. Now let me get into how I made him. As usual, my choice for a male build is Hunter Huntsman, mainly because he's so easy to get hold of. This one has weak knees and ankles, so he needs a new lease of life. He also has this weird stain on his arm that just would not come off. It's definitely soaked into the plastic there, but it's alright, he'll be painted and this will be covered later. I clean his face off with 99% acetone. He was very well loved and super dirty. And I press an acetone soaked cotton pad into the flocking on his head to release that. Fast forward quite a while and I've already moved on to measuring the wire for his tentacles. I started making this doll at the same time I was making Kaya, so there's quite an overlap, and I didn't film some bits like cutting off his face. Anyway, I add Cosclay to each of the wires and sculpt them into his tentacles. And once these are baked, they retain their flexibility, so I compose them. I did pick up this plastic putty, which turned out to be a godsend. And honestly, I'm just testing it here to see how it handles, as well as putting in some unnecessary detail no one is ever going to see again. Whipping right back to what I was doing, I managed to stick in all of his face tentacles and I can glue the wires in place. You can also see his head is full of foam, and that's so it won't flop all over the place. Since his head is an elongated shape, I stuck in some tin foil and hot glued that. Then I can start to add the Milliput. It was a struggle to get these tentacles to stay where they needed to be and not have any visible joins. To anchor them, I filled the space with Milliput and some UV resin for more strength, because experience has taught me that just using Milliput isn't enough. Before the Milliput is fully cured, I use a dotting tool to draw in the rough sketch of where things need to go, so I can sculpt his brains in the right place later. Once the base is all on, I can start to sculpt. I went slowly with this, just the face at first, because if I'd tried to sculpt it all, I would end up wasting a lot of material. So I focused on the front part of his face at first, and I did this in 2 passes. His cheekbones weren't big enough at first, so I added more material on after, and it really does lend itself well to blending. I had the idea to add his eyes with Milliput, but that honestly scared me and I really didn't like how it looked. I know he's supposed to be a mind flayer, but goodness. Now, with the way that I sculpt, I can never get everything in frame from my top-down camera. As you can see, sometimes I need to balance the dolls weirdly. I invested in another arm so I could film from the front and get more of the sculpting process in the videos. It's a work in progress, but I will figure out the best way to do this. With the nature of this sculpt, I'd say it's also necessary to have another angle. So many tentacles. I did keep a reference picture close to me whilst I sculpted. Because those brains baffled me, I ended up kind of going my own way with it. I had sculpted them out of Cosclay first to get a feel for how to actually do it, and that helped a lot. I did have to wait for layers to cure before I moved on to the next bit, which took obviously a few days, but it meant that I didn't squash my progress on one section as I was doing the other. Then, once his head, hands and feet were all done with sculpting, I could paint him. I laid down a layer of white before going in with the greyish purple of his skin. It looks really blue here, and at first it pretty much was, but I do correct it. Again, most of this will not be seen, so it kind of is unnecessary, but I like it this way. I can add pastels and some more detail to his face, however I did decide to sidestep once again onto doing something completely different. I'm sorry it's a bit all over the place, but I started this project ages ago and it's all a little out of order anyway. But there are things he needs, like this skull detail on his armor. I sculpted it out of Cosclay and cut the shape for the rest of it out of foam. You guys are gonna see a lot of foam from now on, and I mean an ungodly amount. This foam detail was the beginning of the journey though, because at this point I still wasn't sure how to go about the armor. I did know that I wanted to use this squeezy putty though for all of the embellishments. So in actuality, I made this piece before I'd even done any sculpting, and I did a lot of tests on how to go about getting the best armor possible, and I will run you through it. First, I need to draw out and cut the shapes of the pieces. This took trial and error. Lots of error and guesswork because this was complicated. I glue together the pieces that need it. I then paint each piece red. This is an important step to take. After I paint, I cover the piece in the base coat of a UV nail resin kit. I then rub mica powder of the correct colour onto it. The base coat helps it stick. Once that's all done, I can cover the top of it in the top coat of the UV resin nail kit. Then I use the putty to draw on the design. When I've waited for that to dry, I can then paint each piece in this gunmetal colour. I cover the whole piece. This is also important. When that is mostly dry, and mind you, not too dry, I can then scratch the red parts of the armor free of the gunmetal colour. The top coat of the UV resin nail kit made this very easy to do. And to neaten it up, I paint the inside too. All that's needed is to rinse and repeat this about 1,000 times for each part of his armor. Whew! I do the same for the hands, as his gloves aren't coming off. And some pieces were easier to complete in their final places, as I didn't want the resin to crack or anything when shaping, and it held its shape much better on the body anyway. Back to scratching. There was so much scratching. I have to say, this is so much more satisfying to watch sped up. And I did try the armor pieces on. When I was happy, I just glued them right down. And some pieces required a little more creativity to create the shape. The last thing for the armor is a drop of resin in places, and that's all finished. For his skirt thing, I took this faux leather and cut it into a rough shape, making sure it fits around his hips. I paint the inside black because we don't want this beige colour to show through. Then I can paint it to the right colour. Red is on the right track, but not this bright red. I then bust out that magical plastic putty and can draw on the details. He also needs some dangly bits of red fabric in the front, so I rough cut those and stick them straight on. Once they're on, the skirt can go over the top. I can now move back to his face. I had the bright idea of adding beads to the eyes instead of sculpting them, and nope, this also scared me. I did not like. So I shelved his eyes for the moment and focused on adding more shadows and depth and detail to the sculpt. I use mostly pan pastels because they're so pigmented, but they're on the more expensive side. I used regular pastels to gradient his tentacles, and I add paint to those later. Then it's time for a wash. Not an actual wash, but a paint wash to get into all the crevices of the sculpt. I had the better idea of adding his eyes with paint. It sat better in the eye holes. These pupils are quite big, and I do change those later for the better. But now I carry on with the washes of colour, making those brains pop. When I'm happy with his head, I give him a coat of matte varnish. This makes him look slimy enough, but it won't reflect all the lights and things when we take the photos. It also protects the paint job. I can now add the final pieces of armor I didn't want to commit to before I finished his head, and there's only one thing left to do. His cape! I had no real idea of how I wanted to do this, and only did it the day we took the pictures. However, I used Cosclay once again. I drew out the shape of the hood part onto paper, laid some greaseproof paper over it, and then stuck the snakes of clay onto that. The main reason for this is because it needs a curve to it, and greaseproof paper is oven safe, so I can lay the whole thing over some tin foil when baking it and it will take on the right shape. Perfect. I sadly didn't film the painting of this as I was under a bit of pressure, but all that needs to be added are the final bits of armor and the actual cape part. Once I glued that onto his back, he was all done. And here he is, all finished. This one was a long time in the making, but I think I did really well with his face. I really do love sculpting faces, especially when they're this creepy. Look at him. Isn't he so romanceable? I really do love him. I think he goes very well with my collection of Baldur's Gate 3 characters already. And I have noticed that they are all red based, so maybe I need to do Halsin or Lae'zel next time. Please go check out Lemon Kitten Creations on Instagram to see more of Dame Aylin. And if you haven't watched her video already, go watch Unbridled Artistry make her own Tav. Also, let me know what you think about him in the comments down below. Remember not to be a dick, or you might get a tadpole in the eye. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you even more for staying until the end. You guys are the real heroes. Purple hearts for those who stayed until the end. Subscribe, like, and ring my bell if you want to do any of those things. If, of course, you want to do those things. Much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Oh no, the consequences of my actions!